Hello and welcome to the 3D Printing Canada LK1 BLTouch installation guide. The LK1 is an extremely affordable 300 by 300 by 400 printer comparable to the Creality CR10 series of printers. The beauty in its design is its simplicity, and out of the box many of the components are very readily available on the market. Like many other 3D printers, adding a BLTouch to this design can greatly increase both its utility and usability, and will generally help in the day-to-day operation of the printer. Let's take a look at all the components needed to do this modification. You will require a standard Antlabs BLTouch kit, either 1800mm or 2000mm extension cables, a 3D printed BLTouch mount, the tool kit that came with the printer, a pair of needle nose pliers, your filament snips, a star head screwdriver, a soldering iron and solder, and finally the SD card and the reader that came with the printer. Let's begin by assembling the BLTouch onto its bracket. The first step of this process will be extracting the BLTouch along with the proper mounting bolts and the nuts we'll need for the process. The rest of the BLTouch kit can be saved and set aside. You can also unplug and set aside the BLTouch wire that's already attached to the unit. Be gentle while you unplug it. Once we have located our parts, we can mount the BLTouch to the bracket. Let's begin with the hole that's closest to the back of the bracket. From the underside of the BLTouch, put the first screw through the BLTouch and the bracket hole. Put some pressure on with your screwdriver, and you can thread the first nut on top of the bolt. Let's repeat the same process with the other bolt. Once we are satisfied that the BLTouch is mounted firmly, we can take our new 1800 or 2000mm extension cable and plug it into the unit. This is important because the plug will be inaccessible after installation. Take your time and don't force anything. The plug will line up with 2 guide slots. The next step is installing the new assembly. Using your Allen key from your toolkit or an Allen key screwdriver like we are here, unscrew the 3 screws holding the fan shroud to the X-axis hot end assembly. The 3 screw holes will line up perfectly with the screw holes on our 3D printed BLTouch mount. Let's start with the middle screw hole. I find that's the least accessible, thus the easiest to install first. You can screw it into the mount all the way until it starts to spin freely, then use that as a guide to anchor the mount to the gantry. Repeat the same process with the other 2 screws. To complete the installation of the wire, we'll have to guide it through the pre-existing cable management tubing. Start by using your snips to clip off the zip ties holding everything together. After freeing everything up, carefully push the loose BLTouch wire into the shroud. Take your time as this process can be a little tedious. The worst thing would be if we managed to sever the wire by overdoing it. Our next step is to dig into the control box and do the board modifications required for the installation. There are 10 screws holding the lid to the bottom of the box, 6 near the bottom, and 4 on the back near the power conduit. After removing all the screws, carefully take the top off the box. Please note that there will be some power wires going from the power supply to the main board. Make sure not to stress these wires at all. At this point, we should plug the hot end cable assembly into its aircraft-style connector on the box. This will assist us in getting our cable management properly done. The Antlabs extension cables for this modification come with a 3-pin JST-XH connector, 2 pins which are occupied. In order to make this work, we will have to modify the connector and remove the unused port. Taking your clips, put them inside the unused port and clip on the top and on the bottom, and the port should start to peel away. Then simply use your clippers to get the rest off. We are also going to have to modify the 3-pin JST connector that has the orange signal, red positive, and brown negative wires. We will have to remove all these wires and put the orange and brown wires in a 2-pin JST connector which comes with the Antlab's BLTouch kit. Using a flathead screwdriver, pry up the tabs holding in the JST connectors. They should slide out nicely after that. Insert the orange and the brown wires into the 2-pin JST connector. Now you should have a configuration that looks like this. The red wire will be soldered onto a part of the board to get voltage to the BLTouch. Looking at the board and the connector cluster, you can see the open connector that's used for the BLTouch signal and the zeidman connector that's currently connected to the zeidman end stop on the printer. Start by unplugging the zeidman end stop. After routing the BLTouch wires through the hole in the back of the control box, connect the white and black zeidman plug. You can see here that the orientation is such that the white wire is to the outside of the connector assembly. Next, we will plug in our newly made 2-pin JST connector with the signal wire and the ground wire. Plug it in so that the orange signal wire is towards the inside of the connector assembly, and the black ground wire is towards the outside. Now it's time to use our soldering iron. Make sure it's nice and hot. Because we will be soldering our red 5-volt wire onto a part of the board, we will have to cut, strip, and tin the wire properly with solder. Study the layout of the circuit board using the diagram on our GitHub and locate the component D7. This is where we will be attaching our red wire to. If you have trouble getting it to solder on, you can build up a small solder blob on the component pad to attach the wire to. The final modification we must make to the board is to remove a very small capacitor called C39. It is also clearly marked on the GitHub circuit board layout. You can either remove this by twisting it with a pair of needle nose pliers or by applying heat with a soldering iron. In this case, we're going to use our needle nose pliers to very carefully twist it off, making sure not to damage any of the capacitors nearby. Make sure that in the end you can see a small black space between the capacitor pads. Before buttoning up the control box, we are going to do a little cable management on our BLTouch wires to make sure they aren't going to tug in one direction or another. Using a zip tie, secure the BLTouch wires to the existing cables in the box. Now it's time for us to reassemble our control box. To finish our cable management, we are going to want to reinstall zip ties securing the hot end cable assembly to the Bowden tube. Once you have flashed the firmware to the SD card, insert it into the printer, and then we can turn it on. The green progress bar on the bottom indicates that the firmware is uploading. When the upload is successful, you will see the Marlin splash screen show up. This step is crucial. Turn the printer off and then remove the SD card. Insert it into your computer and delete the firmware from the SD card, but don't delete the eprom.dat file. That is where all the settings are stored. Make sure that during the operation of the printer, you never power it on again without the SD card in it. This will cause the settings not to load properly. You will notice now that there is a more traditional Marlin interface with a red select button and two blue up and down buttons. Let's go to Motion and then Auto Home the printer. If all goes well, the X-axis and the Y-axis will auto home, and then the Z-axis will home in the center of the bed. To start the calibration process, let's go to Temperature, Preheat PLA, and then Preheat PLA. This sets the nozzle temperature to 200 and the bed temperature to 60. Wait for both bed and nozzle to heat up properly. Now let's click through, go to Motion, and then Auto Home one more time. You might have noticed that we have some filament coming out of the bottom of the nozzle. Take some needle nose pliers and clean that up. Then take a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper and put it underneath the nozzle. Next, we are going to calibrate the probe Z offset. Go to the Motion menu, move Axis, move Z, move by 10 millimeters, and then move it down to 0. Navigate up and out of the Move Z menu, go back to Move Axis, then go back to Motion, back to the main menu, and then we're going to go down to the Configuration settings. From Configuration, go to Probe Z Offset. Now what we can do is hold down the minus button and the Probe Z Offset will start going into the negative range. While we're doing this, move the paper back and forth until we start feeling it lightly grip the paper. The grip should feel a little bit rough on the paper, but it should not stop the paper from moving back and forth. Our setting was approximately negative 2.1 millimeters, but yours is probably going to be different. Back in the configuration menu, go down to Store Settings and click Store Settings twice just to be safe. After that, we can auto home the printer again. For further instructions on setting up the slicer to correctly use the BLTouch on the Longer LK1, please visit our GitHub page where we have the rest of the information for this guide. This modification makes a great and affordable printer even more powerful with auto bed leveling. It is also very easy for the end user. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that whenever powering up the printer, make sure that you have your SD card inserted. That means when you are loading a model to your SD card, load it on using your computer, insert it into the printer, and then power the printer on. From everyone at 3D Printing Canada, we truly hope that you enjoyed this guide and that your modification is a success. Please visit the links below for parts and links to 3D Printing Canada.